I still remember the exact moment my stomach dropped. It was 6:03 in the morning. I was grabbing my keys, half awake, thinking about work, when my sister looked at me in a way I had never seen before. Not angry. Not sad. Afraid. She leaned close and whispered something that didn't make sense at the time. "Don't go home today." That was it. No explanation. No warning. Just those 4 words. And the strange part? She didn't look at me again after saying it. All day, I kept asking myself the same question. What could possibly happen in my own house that would make my sister tell me not to go back? But by the time the sun went down, I understood. Because when I finally drove toward the lake where my grandparents' cabin stood, my parents were already there. And they weren't visiting. They had arrived with a moving truck. Boxes. Locks. Paperwork. And a plan to take the one thing my grandparents left for me, the cabin they trusted me to protect. I was only 18 years old, and they thought that meant I was weak. Too young to fight them. Too naive to understand what they were doing. What they didn't know was that my grandparents had spent years teaching me something far more dangerous than anger. Patience. And that day, the quietest battle of my life began. But before I tell you how my own family tried to steal my inheritance, and the mistake that destroyed their plan, I want to ask you something. If you're listening to this story right now, drop a comment and tell me one word that describes what family means to you. Just one word. Because by the end of this story, you might realize that sometimes the people who share your blood aren't the ones who protect you. And if stories about quiet revenge, intelligence, and justice pull you in the way they pull me in, make sure you subscribe. Because some victories don't happen with shouting. They happen in silence. And this one started with 4 words whispered at 6 a.m. Don't go home today. And by nightfall, I understood exactly why. Before everything happened, my world was small, quiet, and anchored to one place. A wooden cabin beside a long, calm lake in northern Michigan. It wasn't the kind of property people imagined when they heard the word inheritance. There were no gates, no luxury docks, no expensive boats. Just a narrow wooden porch, tall pine trees that whispered in the wind, and the sound of water touching the rocks every night. But to me, it was everything. My grandparents, Arthur and Evelyn Carter, had built that cabin almost 40 years earlier with their own hands. My grandfather used to say the lake taught patience. If you rushed anything, fishing, repairing the dock, even lighting the fireplace, the lake would humble you. So growing up, my summers were spent there. Learning how to patch wood, balance a small canoe, and most importantly, how to pay attention. People reveal themselves slowly, my grandfather once told me while sanding a broken chair leg. If you stay quiet long enough, they forget you're watching. At 18, after they both passed within the same year, the cabin became mine. Not shared. Not managed by the family. Mine. When the lawyer read the will, the room went strangely silent. I remember my father staring at the table. My uncle shifting in his chair. My mother forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. I didn't understand the tension then. To me, the cabin wasn't about money. It was about keeping something my grandparents loved alive. So I kept working my part-time job in town, driving to the cabin whenever I could, fixing little things the way my grandfather taught me. I thought I was honoring their memory. What I didn't realize yet was that in someone else's eyes, that quiet little cabin had already turned into a prize worth taking. And the people who wanted it most were my own family. The day the will was read, I noticed something that didn't feel right. Not immediately. Not in a dramatic way. Just small things. The way my father, Daniel Carter, stopped tapping his fingers on the table when the lawyer said the words, sole beneficiary. The way my Uncle Rick leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly, like someone mentally recalculating a plan. And my mother, Laura, who reached over and squeezed my hand with a soft, fragile smile. "Sweetheart, that's a lot of responsibility for someone your age," she said gently. At the time, it sounded like concern. Now I know it was the first move. My father didn't speak for nearly a minute after the will was finished. When he finally did, his voice was calm. Too calm. Dad must have meant the cabin to stay in the family. The lawyer looked at him directly. It is staying in the family. He left it to his granddaughter. Silence filled the room again. That was the first moment I felt the shift. The invisible line between how they used to see me and how they saw me now. Before that day, I was just the quiet daughter. The kid who stayed out of arguments. The one who preferred fixing the dock with Grandpa over sitting at loud family dinners. But after the will, I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was an obstacle. Still, no one argued openly. No one raised their voice. My mother even hugged me before we left the office. You know we're here to help you manage it, she whispered kindly. Help. That word followed me all the way home. And 3 weeks later, they showed up at the cabin with a moving truck. For the first few weeks after the will was read, everything seemed normal. Too normal. My parents called more often than usual, asking polite questions about the cabin. Did you check the roof before the rain? Are you sure the pipes won't freeze? Have you thought about how expensive maintenance might be? At first, I thought they were just worried. I was 18, working mornings at a small cafe in town and finishing my last year of school. Owning a lakeside property sounded bigger than my life felt. Then one evening, my father called. His voice was relaxed, almost friendly. Your Uncle Rick and I were talking, he said. That cabin is a family place. It always has been. I stayed quiet, listening. So we think the smartest thing, he continued, would be to put the property under shared management. Just a small legal adjustment. Nothing complicated. A pause. It would protect you. Protect me. Those words sounded reasonable. Responsible, even. But something about the tone felt rehearsed. Shared with who? I asked. Another pause, longer this time. Well, the family. Your mother, your uncle, maybe even cousins later. That was the first moment I felt something tighten in my chest. Because my grandfather had been very clear about one thing when he was alive. The cabin survives only if it has one voice making decisions. Too many owners ruin a place. So I answered carefully. I'd like to keep things the way Grandpa left them. The silence on the phone stretched for several seconds. Then my father exhaled slowly. Emma, he said, his voice colder now, you're too young to understand how these things work. That was the first crack. But the real fracture hadn't happened yet. 3 weeks later, my sister's warning finally made sense. That morning at 6 a.m., when she told me, don't go home today, I thought she was being dramatic. My sister, Maya, had always been more sensitive to tension in the family than I was. I spent the whole day at the cafe trying to ignore the strange feeling sitting in my stomach. By late afternoon, curiosity won. So I drove to the lake. The road that led to the cabin curved through a line of tall pines, just like it always had. But before I even reached the driveway, I saw something that made my hands tighten around the steering wheel. A large white moving truck was parked beside the cabin. My father's car. My mother's SUV. And my Uncle Rick's pickup. All three. For a moment I just sat there in silence, engine still running, watching them through the trees. The front door of the cabin was wide open. My uncle was carrying one of my grandfather's old wooden chairs toward the truck. My father stood near the porch talking on his phone. My mother was inside, moving through the living room like she belonged there. Like the place was already theirs. Not one of them looked surprised to be there. Not one of them had called me. They weren't visiting. They were taking over. And in that moment I understood exactly why Maya had whispered those words that morning. They thought I wouldn't come back until evening. They thought they'd be gone before I ever saw what they were doing. But as I stepped out of the car and walked toward the cabin, I realized something even worse. They didn't think I could stop them. When I walked onto the porch, the first person who noticed me was my Uncle Rick. He froze with my grandfather's chair still in his hands. For a brief second, none of them spoke. Then my father slowly ended his phone call and looked at me like nothing unusual was happening. "Emma," he said casually. "You're home early." Home. The word sounded wrong coming from him. I looked past him into the living room. Half the furniture was already moved. Boxes sat near the doorway. My grandmother's old reading lamp was lying on the floor beside a stack of blankets. They had been working for a while. "You didn't call," I said. My mother stepped forward immediately, her expression soft, almost wounded. "We were going to," she said gently. "Sweetheart, we're just helping organize things. This place is too much for you to manage alone." Uncle Rick set the chair down in the truck like the conversation had already been settled. My father crossed his arms. "This cabin belongs to the family," he said. "We're just making sure it stays that way." In that moment, 3 adults stood in front of me, completely certain of one thing. That an 18-year-old girl would panic. Cry. Argue. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My father frowned slightly. "Who are you calling?" I looked at him calmly. "The police." And for the first time that day, the confidence on their faces started to crack. When I said the word police, something subtle changed in the air. Not panic, but calculation. My father stepped closer, lowering his voice the way he used to when I was younger, and he wanted me to feel small. "Emma," he said quietly, "don't embarrass the family like that." My mother immediately followed his tone, placing a gentle hand on my arm. "Sweetheart, you're misunderstanding the situation. We're not stealing anything. We're protecting what your grandparents built." Uncle Rick leaned against the truck, watching me with a thin smile. They were trying to do what they had always done. Pressure. Guilt. Control. 3 adults surrounding an 18-year-old girl, speaking slowly, calmly, like I was being irrational. For a moment, none of us moved. Then I pressed the call button. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply reported that several people were removing property from a house I legally owned. My father's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. But by the time the police cruiser appeared at the end of the gravel road 20 minutes later, the truck doors were still open, and half the cabin's furniture was still inside. The officer listened to both sides quietly. Then he asked a single question. "Who is the legal owner of the property?" I handed him the document from the lawyer. He read it, looked at my father, and said something that changed the entire balance of the day. "Sir, you need to put everything back." And suddenly the plan they arrived with that morning wasn't working anymore. But what none of us knew yet was that this had only been their first attempt. By the time the police car disappeared down the road, the moving truck was empty again. My uncle carried the chair back inside without saying a word. My father slammed the truck door harder than necessary. My mother refused to look at me. None of them apologized. They simply left. The gravel road swallowed the sound of their cars, and the cabin returned to the quiet I had always loved. The lake was calm again. The porch creaked the same way it always had. But something inside me had changed. I sat alone at the kitchen table that night, staring at the same wood surface where my grandfather used to drink his morning coffee. For the first time, I replayed the entire day carefully. They hadn't asked permission. They hadn't called ahead. They had arrived with a truck. That wasn't help. That was a plan. And if there was one thing my grandfather had taught me, it was this. When someone shows you their strategy once, assume they have another. So instead of celebrating the small victory, I did something else. I called the lawyer who had handled my grandparents' will. His name was Michael Reeves. Calm voice. Careful listener. After I explained what happened, he was silent for a moment. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "Emma, if they tried once, they may try something much quieter next time." And he was right. Because while we were speaking, my family was already working on attempt number 2. For the next few days, everything went strangely quiet. No angry calls. No surprise visits. No dramatic family arguments. My parents stopped contacting me almost completely. At first, it felt like relief. The cabin was peaceful again. I went back to fixing small things around the dock, working my shifts at the cafe, and pretending life had returned to normal. But silence can mean 2 very different things. Peace. Or preparation. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table with Michael Reeves on speakerphone, describing exactly what had happened the day of the moving truck. He listened carefully, occasionally asking small questions about who carried what, who spoke first, who seemed to be in charge. It felt strange, analyzing my own family like a case study. Then he asked something that caught me off guard. "Emma, have they asked you to sign anything recently?" I thought about it. My father's call about shared management. My mother's gentle suggestion about protecting the cabin. But I hadn't signed anything. "No," I said. Michael was quiet for several seconds. Then he spoke slowly. "Good. Because if they can't take the property physically, the next step is usually paperwork." Paperwork. It sounded harmless. But the way he said it made my chest tighten. Because while I was protecting the cabin with locks and police reports, someone else might already be trying to rewrite ownership on paper. For the next week, I did nothing obvious. I walked the cabin grounds every morning, fixing loose boards, checking the locks, even rearranging the furniture just slightly to see if anyone had been inside. I didn't call my parents. I didn't confront my uncle. I didn't mention their first attempt. Instead, I watched. Every phone call they made, every text I received, I let Michael Reeves handle. He tracked documents, notarizations, even subtle hints that could appear in legal records. And slowly, patterns began to emerge. My father would bring up family agreements, almost like a casual suggestion. My mother would mention helping manage in emails, carefully phrasing it as concern. My uncle tried to insert himself quietly into local permits and property discussions. It was almost elegant, in a terrifying way. They were trying to suffocate me slowly, through paperwork, through suggestion, through guilt. But I remained calm. Every move they made, I recorded, cataloged, and analyzed. Because I knew one thing Michael had said that stuck with me. The smartest people always reveal their plan to someone who isn't paying attention. Make sure you are paying attention. And I was. They just didn't know how dangerous attention could be. After days of quiet observation, I made my first move. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just deliberate. I asked Michael to check the county property records and recent notarizations tied to my family. At first, nothing seemed suspicious. Just the usual filings, taxes, and small changes. But then he paused. "Emma, look at this," he said, his voice calm but firm. Someone tried to submit an agreement adding multiple family members to the title. Look at the timestamp. My stomach clenched. It had happened while I was at school. My parents, my uncle, someone had tried to forge legitimacy with digital documents. Fake notarizations. Multiple versions with different dates. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. But instead, I stayed quiet. Michael traced the IP address to their home computer. Every click, every submission, every falsified signature was logged. They thought they were clever. But they had left digital fingerprints everywhere. I didn't call them out. I didn't confront them. I waited. Because patience, I remembered, was the deadliest weapon of all. And the trap was only beginning to take shape. A few days later, my mother called. Her voice was syrupy, soft, almost like nothing had happened. "Emma, we're just trying to help," she said. "You don't have to involve lawyers. Think about what this is doing to the family." I stayed silent, letting the words hang. She pressed further, weaving guilt into every sentence, how I was tearing the family apart, how the grandparents would be disappointed, how I was too young to handle such responsibility. Every line was designed to shake me, to make me question myself. But I didn't. Because I knew something she didn't. Michael had already collected every attempt at fraud, every suspicious email, every digital trace of their manipulation. And if she kept pushing, every word she spoke could be used against her. The realization hung in the air. They were blind to the fact that their own strategy was now exposing them. And in their arrogance, they had no idea that the next move wouldn't come from anger or confrontation, but from careful, deliberate patience. They thought they could intimidate me. But in reality, they had only painted the first lines of their own trap. By this point, I knew I had to act carefully. Every move counted. One wrong step, and they could muddy the legal waters, drag me into months, or years, of court battles. But the first step of strategy demanded a sacrifice. I had to let go of something personal, something my grandparents had left untouched, a collection of antique furniture and small heirlooms I loved. Michael explained it plainly: if you move or secure everything too quickly, it looks defensive. Let them touch it. Let them overreach. Then we document it. Every overstep becomes evidence. It felt strange, almost cruel, to let them near things I cherished. But I trusted the plan. I photographed, cataloged, and inventoried everything. Then I walked away. That night, I sat on the porch, listening to the lake. The cabin felt quieter than ever. The sacrifice stung. But the lesson was clear: winning sometimes demands patience, not possession. And as I closed my eyes, I felt the first real confidence that, in silence, I was already steps ahead. Because soon, every piece of their arrogance would unravel. Weeks passed, and they grew bolder. Emails, letters, even a hired attorney claiming my grandparents had intended the cabin to be shared. They thought they had caught me off guard. But I had prepared every move in silence. Michael and I compiled everything: the police report from the moving truck, records of all attempted digital forgeries, copies of every manipulated document, timestamps, IP logs, and email threads. Then I revealed the final piece, the one thing they couldn't anticipate. A secure folder I had discovered in the cabin's hidden desk, my grandfather's personal archive. Inside were letters, requests, and replies, documented proof that every attempt by my family to interfere had been explicitly denied. Every demand from my father, mother, and uncle. Every suggestion to alter the cabin's ownership. All answered with one word: no. I handed everything to Michael. The trap was set. The next communication they made would either incriminate themselves or collapse entirely. And for the first time, I felt the quiet thrill of control, and the certainty that their arrogance had already sealed their fate. When the formal response went out from Michael, everything changed. The letter dismantled every claim. Fraudulent documents were exposed. Digital trails proved forgery. Police reports confirmed trespassing. And my grandfather's archive made their arguments impossible. Suddenly, the family who had believed themselves untouchable was silent. My father stopped calling. My mother's texts dried up. Uncle Rick didn't show up at the property or in any local meetings. Their plan, built on manipulation, intimidation, and deceit, had crumbled. For the first time, I saw the full picture. My grandparents hadn't just left me the cabin. They had left me a roadmap. A guide through my family's patterns. Every letter, every record, every response, they had prepared me to defend what was mine. And in that moment, I understood why my sister had whispered, "Don't go home today." It wasn't just a warning. It was a chance to survive their schemes, and emerge stronger than they ever expected. The cabin was quiet again. The lake reflected the sunset in perfect stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I walked along the porch, feeling the familiar creak under my feet. Every detail, the worn railing, the small knots in the wood, the scent of pine in the air, reminded me that this place had always belonged to me. My grandparents had trusted me with more than property. They had trusted me with their legacy, and now I understood why. They had foreseen the cunning, the greed, the manipulation I would face, and they had armed me with everything I needed to win without anger, without confrontation, just patience and intelligence. No one had come back. No one had tried to undermine me again. The letters, the calls, the threats, they were all stopped before they could reach me. Sitting on the porch, I whispered to the wind, "I'm ready." The cabin wasn't just a house. It was proof that silence, strategy, and calm observation could overpower arrogance and deceit. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Sometimes the people who claim to protect you are the very ones who will try to destroy you, but with patience, you can survive. You can win. You can thrive. I looked at the lake, the sun sinking behind the trees, and smiled. The cabin was mine. Always had been. Always would be. And I was ready for whatever came next. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit like and show that you appreciate a tale of strategy, patience, and quiet revenge. I'd love to hear from you. Comment below with a moment when someone underestimated you or when patience helped you win. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the power of calm intelligence and the art of turning the tables in silence.